Cody Brundage vs Eryk McConico. Welcome back to another edition of Quick Picks with Just Facts Combat, and this week, we're stuck with another lackluster UFC Fight Night card headlined by Dolidze vs Hernandez. Not expecting fireworks across the board, but let's see how this one plays out. First up, Cody Brundage vs Eryk McConico. If we get the same version of McConico who showed up against Ruziboev, this should be an easy win for Brundage. He'll outwork him everywhere. However, if McConico shows urgency and fights like he wants to stay employed, he might land something big, but even then, Brundage has the wrestling to shift momentum. I expect at least one takedown from him, and if McConico doesn't stay active, Brundage can hurt him standing too. McConico has a puncher's chance, and Brundage isn't bulletproof, but if I'm picking based on consistency and overall skill, I'm going with Brundage to either control the fight or finish it late. Final prediction: Cody Brundage via TKO, submission, or decision. Gabriella Fernandez vs Julija Stoliarenko. Gabriella Fernandez has the tools to win this one. She's clearly the better striker and can hold her own on the ground, which should give her a big edge over Stoliarenko. That said, Fernandez isn't without flaws. She can be dragged into uncomfortable fights, like we saw against Wang Kong. Still, Stoliarenko doesn't have the striking to replicate that kind of pressure. Her best shot is to turn this into a grappling-heavy fight and hope Fernandez fades under a grinding pace. Fernandez is muscular for the division and showed signs of gassing against Carly Judici. If Stoliarenko can weaponize cardio and clinch work, maybe she finds a path, but outside of that, she's outmatched on the feet and likely on the ground too. Final prediction: Gabriella Fernandez via TKO, submission, or decision. Uros vs Gilbert Urbina. Honestly, I'm surprised Urbina still has a UFC contract. He's not a bad fighter, and there's clear potential, but he hasn't quite shown UFC level ability. Medic, on the other hand, has proven he belongs, and he's not someone to take lightly. Medic is more aggressive and willing to engage in firefights, while Urbina prefers a slower, more technical approach. Medic also holds the grappling edge if it goes to the mat, though both fighters are primarily strikers. Urbina is the bigger man, coming down from middleweight, so he may carry more power. If Medic gets wild, as we've seen before, there's a risk of him walking into something heavy. But if that doesn't happen, I expect Medic to outwork him, land the cleaner shots, and maybe even mix in a takedown or two for control. Final prediction: Uros via decision or TKO. Joselyne Edwards vs Priscila Cachoeira. This fight's a bit strange but could be fun. Edwards is ranked in a very thin bantamweight division and has been doing fairly well, so matching her with a newcomer to the division like Cachoeira, who's moving up from flyweight, feels a little off. Sure, bantamweight is so shallow that being decent gets you ranked, kind of like heavyweight, but Edwards deserves a step up, not a risky fight defending her spot. Cachoeira is always game and brings chaos. Her war with Ji-Yeon Kim was unforgettable, but Edwards is the smarter fighter. I expect Edwards to stay composed, use footwork, and mix in wrestling. Cachoeira's weakness has always been grappling. She's 35 now, and while she's made some improvements, she still gets dominated by anyone with solid wrestling. Unless Cachoeira's power translates well at 135, which I doubt, she'll struggle. Edwards has decent pop in her hands, and if Zombie Girl tries to walk through shots again, it could cost her. Edwards should be able to pick her apart and potentially stop her if the opportunity arises. Final prediction: Joselyne Edwards via decision or TKO. Elijah Smith vs Toshiomi Kazama. This is a real test of Smith's cardio and mental toughness. His debut looks strong, but we've seen signs of him slowing down late in fights. Kazama may lack high-level skill, but he brings grit, pressure, and durability, even if recent quick losses might suggest otherwise. Kazama tends to fight like many traditional Asian UFC fighters: all heart, little defense. That tough guy style works against some, but not against someone like Smith, who has crisp striking and good timing. If Kazama doesn't use some fight IQ, I can see Smith landing clean and shutting the lights off. That said, if Kazama fights smart, presses with purpose and mixes things up, he could make this a battle. Still, stylistically, it heavily favors Smith. I expect him to pick Kazama apart on the feet, shut down any grappling attempts, and potentially mix in some control himself if he wants to slow the pace. Final prediction: Elijah Smith via TKO or decision. Julius Walker vs Raffael Cerqueira. Walker's debut was solid. I thought he'd outlast and outwork Manyfield, but the veteran showed he's still got gas in the tank. That said, can Cerqueira do the same and push Walker to a loss? Maybe, but I doubt he'll last long enough to make that happen. Cerqueira's defense is barely average, and I don't think Walker will need to land many clean shots to put him out. Cerqueira is at his best when he's able to use range and space to work his kicking game and lure opponents into big counters, but I don't see Walker falling into that trap. Not only is he sharp enough not to walk into strikes, pun intended, but he's also capable of controlling distance, which will limit Cerqueira's tools significantly. I also don't expect Walker to get caught in bad grappling spots. Cerqueira has some submission threats, but Walker's awareness and top control could turn that into his own advantage. If Walker plays it smart, I see him stopping Cerqueira inside 2 rounds, or dominating for 3. Final prediction: Julius Walker via decision or TKO. Hernandez vs Christian Leroy Duncan. This probably won't be a banger. Like I said, this card lacks real excitement, and this fight kinda proves the point. Christian Leroy Duncan is basically the middleweight version of Leon Edwards. He's slick, calculated, but doesn't always press the action. Still, his style favors him here. Hernandez has looked better at middleweight, and his recent fights prove he's still a threat. He arguably beat Barrio and dominated Weidman. But Duncan is younger, faster, and more polished, and I think that's going to make the difference. Anders could outwork him and land the bigger shots, but Duncan has the pop and footwork to nullify that pressure. If Duncan forces Anders to fight his kind of fight, slower, more tactical, he'll likely cruise to a win. Final prediction: Christian Leroy Duncan via decision or TKO. Miles Johns vs Gene Matsumoto. Under the old school MMA scoring, Gene Matsumoto wins this fight comfortably, but under the current damage-first judging system, it could go either way. Matsumoto clearly beat Font in his last outing, but the judges gave it to Font due to cleaner striking, even though he spent most of the fight getting controlled. This new scoring favors damage over control, and Matsumoto learned that lesson the hard way. Against Miles Johns, who's powerful and aggressive with his boxing, Matsumoto will need to be smart. Johns could make this a gritty, dirty boxing match and possibly hurt him, but I think Matsumoto is too fast and elusive, and will be able to disrupt Johns' rhythm and volume. He'll need to mix in more submission attempts and show urgency if he gets top control. Judges don't respect lay and pray anymore. While Johns has great takedown defense, once he's on his back, he struggles. Matsumoto can capitalize on that if he plays it smart. If Johns lands something big, sure, he can end the fight. The guy hits like a truck, but I think Matsumoto keeps it clean and avoids getting robbed this time. Final prediction: Gene Matsumoto via decision or submission. Andre Fili vs Christian Rodriguez. The streak killer Christian Rodriguez is back after a razor-close loss to Melquizel Costa. Could have gone either way, but I wouldn't call it a robbery. Still, Rodriguez showed enough grit and skill to prove he's for real. Andre Fili, on the other hand, seems to be freestyling his career at this point. He's not declining, but he's also not improving. That makes him dangerous in a weird, unpredictable way, but Rodriguez doesn't mess around, and I expect him to come focused. Fili's lack of defense is going to get him tagged, and if he attempts to wrestle, I don't see it working out. Rodriguez has legit takedown defense and great scrambling. Costa out-grappled both these guys, but he's a different level. Rodriguez might even look to wrestle more here. Fili's takedown defense is weak compared to his offensive wrestling, and Rodriguez could steal rounds by mixing it up. On the feet, Rodriguez should land the better counters and tear up Fili's lead leg, something Fili never seems to defend. If Rodriguez controls range and doesn't let Fili dictate pace with his boxing, this fight is his to lose. Final prediction: Christian Rodriguez via decision or submission. Iasmin Lucindo vs Angela Hill. This could be a sleeper hit on the card if both women show up ready to scrap. Let's be honest, this card needs some CPR level revival, and this bout might deliver it. For some reason, I'm leaning toward the veteran Angela Hill. Lucindo's grappling looks basic at best, and I think Hill's wrestling and overall cage IQ will help her take advantage. Hill's experience and speed will pose problems for Lucindo, especially on the feet. Lucindo tends to drop her hands when entering range and fights too upright, which is dangerous against someone like Hill, whose inside boxing is crisp and fast. I expect Hill to mix in some takedowns, keep the pace high, and stay elusive. She may be the underdog here, but I see a classic Angela Hill performance incoming. Volume, movement, and just enough control to edge the rounds. Final prediction: Angela Hill via decision or TKO. Steve Erceg vs O.D. Osborne. This is a pretty interesting matchup, mostly because both fighters have strengths that directly target the other's weaknesses. That said, it feels like a bit of a step down for Steve Erceg, who was just competing at the top of the flyweight division a few months ago. Meanwhile, it's a big opportunity for O.D. Osborne to start fresh at bantamweight. That being said, I think Erceg has this in the bag. His boxing is super sharp, and even at bantamweight, I'd still rate him as a top 5 boxer in the division. He showed it in his flyweight fights, against Pontoa, who had to lean on grappling just to stay safe, and in the Moreno fight as well. Osborne definitely has fast, powerful hands, but he's often been his own worst enemy. Cardio issues and questionable fight IQ have cost him big. We'll have to see how his gas tank holds up at bantamweight. He was a big flyweight, so the weight cut may have been part of the problem, but I doubt his decision-making improves much. Erceg's ability to put together smart combinations and counters is going to give Osborne real problems, especially as the fight goes on. OD's defensive lapses happen too often, and I don't think he survives 15 minutes without getting clipped hard. If Osborne tries to wrestle, I see Erceg defending well or even reversing position. OD tends to play jiu-jitsu off his back instead of trying to get up, and that's not going to work here. Now, sure, Osborne has the power to catch Erceg if the Aussie hesitates too much. We've seen Erceg slow down Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Hernandez. Now we've arrived at the main event, and honestly, it's the only real bright spot on an otherwise weak card. Feels like Dana White's been taking cues from boxing lately, stacking trash cards with a semi-decent main event just to keep people tuned in. It's a disappointing trend. Even a year ago, we weren't getting this many filler fight nights in a row. Heck, even the DDP vs Khamzat card has a weak undercard outside of the Kaman. The UFC's leaning heavily into PPV bait, and for longtime fans, it's a frustrating shift. But back to the fight, I'm picking Anthony Hernandez here. I expect this one to start off wild, but as the pace increases, Hernandez's cardio and relentless pressure will start to overwhelm Dolidze. Unless Roman lands something heavy early, he's going to get outworked as the fight progresses. Dolidze's path to victory lies in hurting Hernandez early and forcing respect. That'll allow him to slow the pace and control the center. His own cardio isn't bad, but under real pressure, we've seen cracks. If he can keep his gas tank in check, his superior wrestling and high-level grappling might help him stuff Hernandez's takedowns and keep the fight competitive, at least early on. Another key for Dolidze is targeting the body. Hernandez has shown vulnerability there before, and a well-placed body shot could change the entire fight. But realistically, I think Hernandez survives the early danger, mixes it up well, and drowns Dolidze over the rounds with volume and pace. Final prediction: Anthony Fluffy Hernandez via decision or submission.